Now in this video, we are going to look at animal behavior. And as you can see here, a behavior is anything that an animal does in response to a stimulus. And a lot of times, when people think about behavior, it's like, how do you act? Well, that's kind of what it is when it's related to biology. But when we look at behavior, we find that there's two types of behavior. One type is where we do things that we're just born knowing how to do, and others we have to learn how to do, like ride a bike or tie our shoes. So when we look at animal behavior, we're hoping that behaviors have an adaptive value, which means it's going to help species survive. So like when we talk about having bad behaviors like smoking or vaping, well, that's not what nature wants us to do. So nature is going to try to destroy that behavior. And so when a creature has a behavior, it's supposed to be helping them survive so that they can have offspring. Now, in the case, like I mentioned, with behaviors, we find that behaviors fall into one of two categories. The first type of behavior are what we call innate behaviors. These are also called inherited behaviors. These are behaviors that the animal is born just knowing how to do. Nothing taught these animals to do this. And so it tends to be genetically programmed. Now, why do bears hibernate in the winter? We don't know. But nothing says, hey, you need to be looking for these types of signs in order to know that you need to start hibernating. Nothing teaches the bears, hey, this is when you hibernate, this is when you wake up. Nothing teaches a spider how to build a web. These are all innate behaviors. So innate behaviors are behaviors that creatures are just born knowing how to do. A lot of people call these instincts, but instinct is actually just one type of innate behaviors. Now, the most common innate behavior is a reflex. We all know about reflexes. And reflexes are automatic responses with no conscious control. Basically, a reflex is something our body does to protect us. So like, for example, when you sneeze, you close your eyes. And that's not because your eyeballs are going to pop out. But when you sneeze, you're blowing mucus and water droplets and any particles out of your body. And your eyeballs are living material. So you don't want that trash to blow up inside of your eyes. We have this knee-jerk reflection. It probably goes back to ancient times when part of a predator-prey situation is something grabs your leg, then the reflex would cause you to kick that creature away. Reflex also play a role in what we call our fight or flight response. With fight or flight, these are controlled by hormones. Adrenaline or epinephrine is the hormone that most people know in regards to fight or flight. And this is reflex, like when you hear a loud noise, your body automatically curls up and your muscles tense. And that's to either fight off whatever's coming through that door at you or to turn around and run away as fast as you possibly can. Now, we also have what are called instincts. And instincts are innate behaviors caused by a stimulus and continuing until all parts of the behavior are performed. Now, if you were to Google this or watch different videos, you'll also see these are called FAPs, or fixed action patterns. With instincts, again, these are things that creatures just know how to do. So for example, babies suckling to draw milk, or if you have an infant, if you were to grab that infant's hand, that infant's going to automatically curl his hand around your finger. It will do the same thing with your feet if you grab its feet. So instincts are just things that nature has genetically programmed that these creatures just automatically know how to do. So again, nothing teaches a spider how to build a web. That is instinctive. Now, a lot of creatures, if you think about it, most creatures don't know what they look like. A stick insect doesn't know it looks like a stick. Okay? Most birds don't know what they look like. They don't know what color is. They don't know what it means to be red. They don't know what it means to be yellow. And so most creatures identify with other like creatures through what's called courtship behavior. Now, as humans, we have the intellect to know what what I look like. I know what I look like. I know what a mirror is. I know what a reflection is. I know that as humans, we all look alike. But again, spiders, dogs, cats, they don't know what they look like. A bee doesn't know what a bee is. It doesn't know what it looks like. But so they have to develop patterns to know, hey, okay, this creature has some of the same genetic programming that I do. So they have this courtship behavior, and this allows for recognition of the same species. So two snakes, you know, this gardener snake doesn't know what it looks like, and this rattlesnake doesn't know what it looks like, but two snakes come in contact with each other, and they began a kind of like a dance. And they immediately recognize, okay, my pattern of dance doesn't match this other creature's pattern of dance. So they go their separate ways. And so this is this idea that we call courtship behavior. Now, we also have this need to protect what belongs to us, and that is atomic, that is instinct. This is what we call territoriality or territory defense. This is when an animal defends a physical space. Everybody has its own personal space. You've got your stuff, you've got your area, be it your room, your car, your favorite chair, that's your space. And when something gets into your space, it makes you a little bit aggravated. And you're like, hey, back off, get out of my personal bubble. Well, this is this idea called territoriality. And this is just our need to protect our space. It does help reduce conflict and competition, believe it or not, because people realize, creatures realize, okay, we got this little bubble around us. Don't get in my bubble. As long as you stay out of my bubble, we're not going to have a problem. And every creature, every animal has its own little bubble, and so it doesn't want people getting in its personal space, so it's not going to get into another animal's personal space. And so a lot of creatures will use a hormone called a pheromone. If you've ever gotten a new cat or a dog, you might notice they go around and they pee on everything. That's because they are secreting pheromones. They're marking their territory. No creature in nature has the same DNA, so no creature in nature smells the same. As humans, we all have different smells because my DNA is different than your DNA. So my scent glands will make a different smell than your scent glands. But as humans and evolution, we've gotten away from using scent as a marker or an identifier. But a lot of creatures will mark their territories. They will leave this pheromone and it says, hey, this is my property. So other creatures, other animals coming in will smell that hormone and realize, okay, there's another animal already here. There's a decision I need to make. Am I going to just walk away and respect that other animal's territory, or am I going to invade it? And when you invade it, that leads to aggressive behavior. Aggression, as you guys know, is this turmoil, it's this conflict, and it's how an animal will defend its territory. So it might be physical fighting, it might be ramming each other, and a lot of times when you see these creatures, these animals fighting with each other, it's not to the death. It's basically to show, hey, I'm the one in charge, and to get the other one to become submissive and bow down. And so therefore, a lot of animal societies have what we call dominance hierarchies. They have an alpha male and they have an alpha female. They have a social ranking within a group. Everybody knows their place. They know that this is the alpha, this is the alpha male, this is the alpha female, they're the ones in charge. I know that my role, I'm a hunter, or it's my job to take care of the offspring, but everybody has a job. It just, in a lot of situations for animals, really does make their life easier. Also, something we have is what's called circadian rhythm. This is behavior based on a 24-hour cycle. Most of you know the term nocturnal, and nocturnal, as you know, are animals that are active at night. Well, as humans, we are diurnal, and diurnal creatures are active during the day. But it is actually innate. It is in us to be active during the day, or it's active during night. Now, as humans, we are able to adjust our sleep patterns. So, a lot of people might work a night shift, and so they're active during the night, and they come home and they sleep during the day. But if given a chance, our bodies will automatically revert to being diurnal creatures. Migration is also innate. Nothing tells these birds, hey, it's time to go. And it's always been very interesting to me as to how do they know where to go? Disney Plus has this really cool video about penguins that has come out this is being filmed during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it talks about how these penguins always go back to the same place. Well, how do they know that? How do they know to find that? Nothing taught them, hey, this is the map that you need to use. but something is in these creatures that tells them to migrate. Maybe it is a change in the weather, or maybe these creatures can sense that the days are getting shorter, the days are getting longer. Sea turtles some types of sea turtles tend to use the stars as navigation. And I think that's amazing. Like, how did we even figure out that the sea turtles were using stars? But something tells these creatures genetically inside of them, it's time for them to move from place to place. Now, hibernation is also an innate behavior that you've heard of since you were a child. And you know that hibernation is a reduced state of metabolism during cold winter months. So squirrels, chipmunks, as you see here, they spend their spring and summer gathering food and getting as fat as possible, just like bears. And then something tells them, okay, it's time to go into your burrow and go to sleep. And they'll live off their body fat supply until something triggers them to begin to wake back up. Now, hibernation is one that all people are, again, familiar with. You might not know its sister, which is called estivation. Estivation is the same idea, but this happens during really dry or hot periods of time. So it's a state of reduced metabolism during intense heat. And so, for example, as you can see in this picture, toads. Frogs and toads have to breathe through their skin, so they have to stay moist. And so in times of extreme heat, the toad or the frog will bury itself down in the soil because the soil is cold and the soil is moist. Well, they'll go into this state of estivation, they will sleep, and then the rainy season comes. And as the rains, fall down and the soil absorbs this water, their little burrow will begin to fill up with water. And that triggers them, okay, it's time for me to wake up. Now, all of these are examples of what we call innate behaviors. Nothing taught these creatures how to do this. A mama frog did not sit down in a classroom and tell the baby frogs, hey, this is what estivation is. This is what you need to look for. This is when you go to sleep. This is when you wake up. These creatures just know how to do this. Now, that's different from what we call learned behaviors. Learned behaviors are behaviors that you have to practice. These are behaviors that somebody had to teach you how to do them, and you had to experience these behaviors. Now, with the innate behaviors we just went through, there's no rhyme or reason, there's no order to these. But in this video, the learned behaviors are listed in a particular order, and they're in order according to complexity. So the first learned behavior that we're going to go over is the easiest for an animal to learn how to do. And the last learned behavior is the hardest for an animal to learn how to do. But learned behaviors, when we talk about learning, is you have to be taught something. You have to practice it. You have to memorize it. And the very first one is what's called habituation. Now, the formal definition, as you can see here, occurs when an animal is repeatedly exposed to a stimulus not associated with a punishment or a reward. In simple terms, this is where creatures learn to ignore things. You learn to ignore things. It's one of the very first things you learn how to do. For example, when babies are born, they've never had clothes on. And then all of a sudden we shove a diaper on them. And that diaper is uncomfortable, it's rubbing up against their skin. They have to learn to ignore the feel of the diaper. Okay. You ignore the feel of your clothes. Now that I mentioned your clothes, you can feel them on your skin. Your skin always feels your clothes. It's not important. If your brain registered every single thing that hits it, you would just lose your mind. So your brain has to learn to weed things out. So we wear clothes. Clothes constantly touch our skin. We've learned to ignore it. Growing up, my grandmother had this grandfather clock, and it was right outside my bedroom door. But I could go a whole day and never hear the grandfather clock. Well, my brain heard it, but my brain's like, I'm just going to ignore it. That's habituation. Okay. People might live in areas where there's a subway or a train that goes by, And if you're a visitor, you're like, how can you live here? You know, this train is so loud. And they're like, oh, I didn't even hear it. That's habituation. Your body has to learn to weed things out. And it's one of the first things, one of the earliest things that we learn how to do. After that comes imprinting. And imprinting, at a critical time in life, an animal forms an attachment to another organism. This is why, for example, as soon as a baby is born, the doctors and nurses want to give that baby to the parents. And in all honesty, they want to give it to the mom as fast as possible. Baby, like I mentioned, we all have a certain smell. The mom has to get used to the baby, has to recognize the baby smell. Now, as humans, babies have this cute smell. They want us to like them. But as humans, we have a little bit different relationship with our offspring than other animals. This is why you shouldn't touch baby animals that you might find in your yard, because you're going to leave your smell on those animals. And so when the mom comes, the mom says, okay, what's this weird smell? It doesn't belong to my child, and the mother will ignore the offspring. So this is also why, if you've noticed, in film or TV, when you see people feeding baby animals, like at a zoo, they tend to use puppets. That's because the baby animal has to get used to knowing, okay, what does my mom look like? And as humans, we don't want that baby imprinting on us. Which then leads to what's called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is also what we call trial and error learning. And this is where, as humans, we got most of our learning from. This is also what I call practice makes perfect. You had to learn to sit up. You had to learn to dress yourself. It was a sense of accomplishment. Hey, I'm a big kid. I got dressed by myself. It was motivation. You had to be potty trained. You had to learn to walk. You had to learn to write. You had to learn to, again, roller skate. These are all examples of operant conditioning. You had to practice writing your name. You had to practice reading. You had to practice riding your bike. You had to practice tying your shoes. This is all what we call operant conditioning. Now, so at this point, habituation is the very first type of learning. It's the easiest for animals to learn how to do. Then comes, my brain just died. Then comes imprinting, and then comes operant conditioning. Now, a lot of creatures don't really, depending on the animal, numbers 4 and 5 are very, very complex. And the next one we have is called classical conditioning. Now, operant conditioning is trial and error learning. It's practice makes perfect. Classical conditioning is association. So you're like, okay, what does that mean? Well, with operant conditioning, I learned to tie my shoe. I had to practice tying my shoe. Classical conditioning is where you associate things. So for example, when we see the color red, we think heat, we think stop, we think danger. That's association. When we see the color blue, we think cold, we think ice. That's association. And the classic example was Pavlov's dogs. When dogs smell meat, they salivate. And so he began to, anytime he was getting ready to feed his dogs, he would ring a bell. And then he would bring the dogs their food. So they began to associate the sound of the bell with getting fed. So it got to the point where he could just ring the bell and the dogs would run around salivating just like there was meat present even when there wasn't. Now, the fifth type of learning is the hardest type of learning for animals to, pardon my pun, learn how to do. And that's what we call insight. And insight is reasoning. And reasoning is basically where you have to solve a problem. And I don't mean a math problem. It's where you have to use your prior experience to figure out, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to fix this? A classic example was they had a chimpanzee and they tied fruit to the ceiling. And then they put a bunch of boxes in the room. And they let the chimpanzee into the room, and the chimpanzee looked up and saw the fruit on the ceiling and started to jump to try and reach the fruit. And you could tell that the chimpanzee was getting very, very, very frustrated, and he just kind of sat down. And then the chimpanzee started playing with the boxes in the room. And over a period of time, the chimpanzee figured out, oh, I can stack these boxes and climb up the boxes and get the fruit. So the chimpanzee solved a problem. And that's what we call insight. It's the hardest type of learning for a creature to be able to accomplish. Now, we also have social behaviors, and these are behaviors between animals of the same species. So again, that would be like courtship, territoriality, and the ability to communicate with each other. And with communication, again, this is an exchange in information resulting in a change of behavior.